All right, shalom family, and welcome back to the Semitic Jew channel. If you're watching this video, I hope you're having a good day. Today is March the 20th, 2026, and I saw this thread come across my feed on X, and I just want to dive into it. So something told me to create a video about it because it looks like it had a lot of attention, which can be a bad thing for people if they're not careful. Because I want you to watch how people sound very confident on the internet, but they commit basic logical errors. Because this entire thread is not really scholarship, it's assertions that are stacked on other assumptions. Okay. So it's assertions stacked upon assumptions that he's making, presuppositions that he has. So again, shalom. I am Semitic. I'm a university professor of mathematics, and I specialize in logic. I'm also working on a PhD in mathematics. There will be emphasis on logic as well. So let's do something that's obviously rare on the internet. We're going to actually reason correctly. So first of all, the thread opens with this claim. All right, so I have it on the screen here. It says, to find Israel, we must determine who is not Israel. So again, it sounds intelligent, but it's not. It's called a false dichotomy. Just because you eliminate one group does not logically implicate another group. That's a false dichotomy. That's like saying, if I prove you're not the killer, I've proven who is the killer. You can't do that. That's not how logic works. Moreover, let me go to the next slide here. He says, the best way to approach modern ethnicities is to begin with the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10. Okay, so Genesis chapter 10, all right, fine, the table of nations, okay. But here's the problem. Genesis chapter 10 gives us ancient geological origins. The Europeans reclassified people groups, and even some sovereign nations stopped referring to themselves as an ancient region or as an ancient people that lived in a region. For, example, Iran. Iran used to be known as the land of the Persians. Now it's not. They call themselves Iran. So where can you find that in the scriptures? You cannot find Iran in the scriptures. So a good reference point, he says, to go to Genesis chapter 10, the table of nations. Here's the problem. Genesis chapter 10 gives ancient geological origins. Ancient ones, not modern ones, not modern ethnic mapping systems. Again, many of the reclassifications came with the Renaissance period when they started whitewashing everything. Even hundreds of centuries before that, when Rome got their hands on the Hebrew writings and created Christianity, modern Christianity, or that evolved into modern Christianity. So Genesis chapter 10 gives ancient geological origins, not a modern ethnic mapping system. So he's already starting off terrible. So you can't project modern races backward into Genesis chapter 10. Guess what that's called? That's called an anachronism fallacy. An anachronism fallacy is essentially when someone takes a modern group and immediately maps them onto the ancient group. And I believe what he does is he attempts to use genetics and say that genetics is the definitive marker for saying that those people are ancient, or excuse me, that DNA is a reference point for this Genesis chapter 10 amalgamation of the nations. But you cannot do that. DNA is incapable of doing that. DNA can tell you who is over there now, and then what you're going to do is you're going to say, oh, if you're a North African, Middle Eastern, therefore you must have Canaanite blood. That's exactly what they're doing. That's called anachronism. It's an anachronism fallacy. So you can't force a modern racial framework onto an ancient text that never uses race categories the way that he's attempting to use them. Moreover, he says, in addition to Canaan, Noah's son Ham fathered Cush, meaning black. The Cushites, literally their blackness. Okay, Cush means black, Ethiopian, therefore, okay. So this is a linguistic oversimplification fallacy. So, and you're going to be inundated with that term because this is deceit. Fallacy is a word that means a deceptive argument. Okay, where you begin with a faulty premise leading to a conclusion that, I mean, you can't build a faulty foundation and then try to build up. That's essentially what a fallacy is. So Kush means black, Ethiopian. Okay, so Ethiopian. Okay, fine. Well, guess what? If you find one reference to Kush meaning black, what he's doing is trying to balloon it and say that therefore all the other nations weren't black, or that only Ham had one son, that son being Cush, and therefore he was the only black child. They are incapable of critical thinking, whoever thinks that way. And this guy, you know, is deceiving people with this type of rhetoric. So words don't carry one static meaning across all contexts. You can look at you go to just about any Hebrew term in what we call the Old Testament writings that we've compiled from Israelites, by the way. You can go to one term. Guess what? That one term can mean 1 to 7 or 8 or 9 different things based on the context. So a term can change meaning based on its context, how it's used. We do it all the time in our community, so-called black people. We say, "Man, she's bad," but actually we mean that she's attractive. Or we say that, "Man, you're being bad." Obviously, we're talking about your behavior. So we're using it in a metaphorical sense. So saying Cush is black and it only means that the Ethiopians are in this, that's a linguistic oversimplification fallacy. Words can't carry the static meaning. The context is king. Also, Jeremiah 13:23 is being abused right here. So he says, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots?" That verse is about immutability of condition, not a racial classification. We can say that even though we know for a fact historically the Ethiopians were black, that's not a correlation by saying that the Cushites are the only black people that Ham produced, or Ham himself happened to be pale, and then he only had that one son that was black, or that Shem and Japheth weren't black. That's the conclusion. It's also a hasty generalization, but I want to inundate you with the fallacies that this guy's making. But it's telling you this is very common on the internet. People don't reason at all. So the next one I want to look at is, I think he has another, I think there's about 14 of these things I have here. So the next reference is, he says, "Ham also fathered Mizraim, now known as the Egyptians. Their own artwork reveals their complexions was between bronze and black. In other words, simply being of black African descent does not make one an Israelite." Okay. So again, so he's basically saying that he knows that the ancient Israelites were in the land and region and intermarried with people that ranged from bronze, and bronze means essentially my color, even some lighter than me, people who would still be classified as black in the modern sense. So, in other words, simply being of black African descent does not make one an Israelite. Okay, so we could also use that against him and say, well, isn't it also true that based on your argument that Japheth and Shem could also fit into that diagram? That's saying that just because you assume that there is one group that has pale skin, being of a European descent, that there are no other Europeans or so-called pale skin in other demographics or other biblical nationalities. So, very, very weak argument there. And he says, likewise, contrary to BHI, experiencing slavery does not make one an Israelite. Virtually all ethnic groups have, throughout history, both owned slaves and been enslaved. Example, Muslim concierges enslaved over 1 million Christian Europeans between 16th. Okay, this is the Barbary Coast dilemma. So Barbary Coast, and they love citing Thomas Sowell. So Thomas Sowell, I mean, I'm not going to go into like what he believed, but they love citing him because he believes, he gives them a reference point, and it's a very weak one because uh, they think that the term slavery means everything in every context. Biblically, servant is a more appropriate term. There was no such thing as race-based chattel slavery ever in existence in all of humanity. And what I mean by that is, show me a reference point in history where people lost their name, lost their culture, lost their heritage, and then even after they were emancipated, supposedly, that uh, they were there was redlining, there were Jim Crow, there was uh, a, what is it called? So many other systems that I can reference. So many. I mean, my mind is just like a computer. But obviously, where does that? Where is that? There's no reference to it. So the false equivalence between using the term slavery and servant, those two things are mutually exclusive. The people that he's referencing, well, we know for a fact that our people were in North Africa and eventually got pushed out after, or excuse me, during the Arab slave trade. So this idea that the Barbary Coast only involved Europeans, and notice he says Christian Europeans. What like what does that even mean? They identified as Christians. They identified as Europeans, but because Europe is just a read is a huge country continent, so to speak, with countries in it. So what is he talking about? So everyone experienced slavery. So that proves what? Nothing. That's a straw man argument. Because again, no one is arguing slavery alone equals Israel. We know that the Israelites went into slavery over and over again. You can find that reference in Luke chapter 21 verse 24. Ironically, that was during the time of Christ. Christ said, "Guess what? You guys are going to go into captivity again." Again. Read Luke 21:24. Christians don't like that verse. Deuteronomy 28:64. You are going to go into captivity again in ships. When did that happen? When did that happen? Captivity into all nations? That's not these people. That's our people. So saying that some slavery somewhere in history doesn't equate to biblical ethnic chattel slavery. The only time that chattel slavery is referenced in the Bible is in Deuteronomy 28:64. Or excuse me, I'll say the curses that God promised would happen to the Israelites. That they would lose everything, that they would go into the other nations, and they would literally have no might, they would have no nothing. They would be at the mercy of all the other nations. That doesn't fit anyone on earth except for us. So not some slavery in history. And so again, he's attacking a version that he assumes answers this question. That's not logic. That's evading other things that fit and are stronger in juxtaposition to what he's saying. So again, I believe he mentions, where is it? Let's see here. Then who are the Israelites? Who are the tribe of Judah known as Jews? So where is that reference point? So okay, so he mentions King Herod. So King Herod, an Edomite fox Jew, ruled Jerusalem during Christ's first advent. Okay, so and then he says Judas Iscariot, man of also an Edomite, betrayed our Lord. They're prophesied they are prophesied to again rule Zion prior to Jesus' return. Now, this guy has some mixture of some things that we would ascribe to. The fact that the Edomites, being the so-called white people, he himself is also an Edomite, as much as he wants to run from that truth. So we would say that yes, definitely. Even going back to Luke 21:24, the Edomites or the Gentiles in general are going to be in that region trotting it down. That's what's happening over there right now. White Europeans who they call themselves European, they call themselves white, they call themselves American, they call themselves Jewish. They're Edom. So, quoting Ptolemy, Herod, Edomite, the Pharisees infiltrated. Here's the issue. You can't, this is a selective bias. He doesn't really elaborate on these claims. You cannot cherry pick one quote, ignoring the broader historical context, and then build this sweeping ethnic conclusion. That's a huge problem. We know Herod was an Idumean, but that does not logically implicate that. I believe he thinks that Jewish people of today are only Edom. How about implicating yourself? So again, that's a leap. It does not follow. So, and then let me go on because I don't want this to be too long. After Herod slaughtered the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and Sadducees were infiltrated by Edomites. This is why they told Jesus they had never been enslaved. Josephus confirms only the Essenes who gave us the Dead Sea Scroll were purely Jewish. Okay, these last are Jews by birth. Okay, so again, I can talk about this, but this kind of reiterates similitude of what he was talking about. Let's see, the Surnames Rothschilds, the family who played an instrumental role in securing Palestine for the Zionists, translated into Hebrew means okay. The surname Rothschilds, Shield of Edom. They always want to possess the lands, and now okay. So again, like I said, with respect to pale faces, he's right. These people are Edom, but he's also Edom. He's also Edom. Them wanting the land and him, the only thing that's disjoining him from them is he would say that he's a Christian. But Christians, guess what? They want the promises. So how is he any different from them? How is he any different from this group? Then he mentions Benjamin Tadula. So, I mean, of course, I can go back to this, the Shield of Edom. I think he references like their name. I think he says the Rothschilds, the surname Rothschild, the family who played in Israel. I think he references this, saying that that term means Shield of Edom. Okay, we wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, even though it's like an etymological fallacy, meaning that you can't take a term and like say break a term down and say, oh, this is that. That's etymological fallacy. But we know for a fact historically, just tracing the deception of Esau, that yeah, it's consistent, but you can't say that based on this word that therefore this is that. You can't do that. And then he says Benjamin of reveals 4 lost tribes were then in Iran. And look at the face. These people are not in Iran, man. These people, these people are not native to Iran. These pale faces. I'm not even going to read this bogus stuff because he's trying to paint a falsehood. He's giving you the image and then ascribing this to that. Come on, man. Get out of here, bro. It's ridiculous. Josephus states Ruus discovered that both the Jews and the Spartans are of one stock. That's true. That's also in the Apocrypha. Herodotus states the Spartans arrived in Greece and Egypt. You know what's so funny? Spartans also offered new moons and the seventh day of the month. Yes, because we know for a fact the Spartans were Israelites. But look at this. He uses a pale face. This is Hollywood. You can't use Hollywood to make a justification for this. But he wants to paint an image that the Israelites are pale. Herodotus states, guess what? Did you know that that Herodotus also states that the Israelites look like Ethiopians? And Ethiopians were literally called burnt face. So again, if you don't know history, you're going to ascribe to this baloney. And we hate pork. So then the next one he says, this is really going to disappoint the BHM. It's a movement, but it's the truth. After citing the letter, Josephus makes a shocking: in a bathhouse, if the Jew hid the circumcision of their genitals, they could appear to be Greeks. Okay, so he's saying that the Greeks were an uncircumcised community. Did you know the Egyptians practiced circumcision? Did you know that the Israelites practiced circumcision? So of course. So the Egyptians, the Israelites practice circumcision. These two are dark skinned people. They're not pale face. Circumcision did not come in with the pale faces whatsoever. He's literally telling on himself by saying that the Greeks, they could appear as the Greeks who were not circumcised. Europeans were not circumcised because it's not a European culture. So again, Judah, turn that on. Turn that back on, Judah. Okay, thank you. All right, no more touching. Thank you, sir. All right, go back in there with mommy. I gotta finish this, okay? I'm almost done, and then I'll come down with you all. So the next slide is, research isn't racism. Okay. Research isn't racism. And God is the creator of distinct ethnic identities. Satan resists the truth. The synagogue claims to be Jews, but are not. They don't want us to expose them. Ethnic Israel and Judah exist. They're able to be located and identified. Man, I'm telling you, this guy is so lost in, like, he's taking modern conjecture, he's taking some biblical data, he's taking some of his own assumptions and DNA studies and trying to put it all together. It's confusion. It's Babylon is what he's doing. God is the creator of distinct ethnic. Yes. Satan resists the truth. Okay. The synagogue of Satan claims to be Jews. Okay, we know that they are Edom. We know that you're also Edom. They don't want us to expose them. He's Edom. He's trying to implicate them while saying, hey, don't look at me, don't look at the Christians. Ethnic Israel and Judah exist. We know. Because the Israelites were scattered into all regions, all nations. Judah was also scattered. Read Luke chapter 21, verse 24. Judah, I'll be down there in a second, okay? Ethnic Israel, Judah existed. Yeah, we know that. We know that they were scattered into all nations. And we know that the promises were that they were going to forget their heritage, culture, and go into bondage, chattel slavery, lose their heritage, lose their culture, etc. So saying that they're able to be located, yeah, through prophecy, through the scriptures, not through, Gentile identity markers or Gentile revelation. God does not reveal his will to Gentiles. He's a Gentile. God does not reveal his will to non-Israelites. These people don't even keep God's commandments. They think it's all about faith. Replacement theology. He says, if we diligently research together, we're going to figure it out. Oh, you got a ways to go. When you figure out the truth, it's going to be very compelling. You might eventually become an atheist. According to Ezekiel 37, Israel and Judah are prophetically dead. Prophetically dead? Meaning like they forgot their culture, heritage, or what was beaten out of them because they went into slavery? Remembering nothing. That's interesting, right? But will be brought back to life in the last days. Who is he talking about? He's talking about us. O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This guy is, remember when Balaam was told to go and prophesy against the Israelites, and he went, and when he prophesied against the Israelites, he actually said things that were benefiting to us. That's what this guy did. Most of it, not all of it, but most of it. He thought this was a condemnation. It's really a condemnation against him. So again, you got to be really careful with pastors. I believe he's a pastor. Pastors like this who say things that are absolutely false, just false. So I want to leave you with this. I do have a podcast, the Semitic Jew podcast, where I talk about various things, especially slavery, how Europeans believe that the Bible condones European chattel slavery. It doesn't. I talk about things like the word chosen, so many other things that people have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. And we use the biblical text, we use logic, and we use consistency, which is something that you won't find when you are dealing with people who don't understand the scriptures. Shalom.